So there has been a lot of discussion around whether Kobbie Mainoo is better playing in the midfield double pivot or as a left-sided interior forward in the front three. Now some people refer to these positions as the number 6 and the number 10, which to me doesn't make much sense because they are far too vague, and what do they actually mean? For example, what do you mean by a number 6? Is it the deepest or most defensive-minded player in the midfield? Well, that would apply to both Agate and Rodri, for example, but clearly they are two very different players stylistically. And what do you mean by number 10? Because I don't really see how you can refer to any role in Amorim's 3-4-3 as a number 10, or at least what is traditionally referred to as a number 10, because to me a number 10 is someone who operates mainly centrally at the point of the midfield between the lines, such as Mesut Ozil for Real Madrid in Jose Mourinho's 4-2-3-1, which is a very different role to the two players playing either side of the centre forward in Amorim's 3-4-3. Due to Ozil at Real Madrid, who I'd prefer to define as an enganche, not having to drift out into wider areas as players in Amorim's system would be expected to do in these positions during different phases of play. And so that's why I don't refer to positions as numbers, and actually you can have two players playing in the same position on paper who operate in very different ways. For example, Amorim could use either Mainoo or Agate as the left-sided interior forward. Now the reason I refer to this positionally as a forward is just because I consider this position more correlated with the forward line than the midfield line, and obviously I refer to it as interior because they are primarily playing on the inside of the fullback rather than the outside. However, whilst Garnacho and Mainoo on paper would be playing the same position, they are playing very different roles due to the attributes in their skill set, and this is where I think Football Manager does a fantastic job of allowing you to understand a player's role in the system, because by referring to these roles by specific names rather than vague terms like number 6 or number 10, you can actually understand what the player is expected and likely to do in a given position. Garnacho in this position, due to his speed, ball carrying ability and movement in behind the back line being far greater than his technical ability and press resistance with his back to goal, is better referred to as an inside forward. Whereas because the opposite is true with Mainoo, a better description of his role would either be as a standard advanced midfielder, or maybe even a Mezzala in Football Manager terms, because unlike Garnacho, you primarily want him receiving the ball to feet, rather than spinning in behind and running onto a pass. And so I think you can now see how whilst Garnacho and Mainoo on paper would be playing the same position, they are playing different roles. But this doesn't answer the question as to whether Mainoo could play further forward in this position in a specific role. Well, before I tactically break that down, a quick reminder, I do have an in-game Instagram group chat where we do have analysis and discussions throughout all the Manchester United games. I'm also working on a tactical ebook, so if you are signed up to the Instagram group chat, when that is released you will get it for free, which will work out slightly cheaper than just buying the book outright. I've also got some unreleased videos and articles on my Patreon at a lower price as well, so if you do want to sign up to the Patreon, I'll leave it linked in all the usual places, the eye above, comment section, description, and on the end screen after the video. So to be honest, the answer to that question that I previously asked is it depends. It depends on the setup and the players around Mainoo when he's playing in this position. For example, I'm going to show you two different lineups in the 3-4-3 with Mainoo in this advanced role. One, I think Mainoo could play in this higher position as the interior forward, playing from the left side, and in the other one I don't think he could function there effectively. See if you can work out the difference from the players around him, pause the video, then drop it in the comments and come back. So the difference is pretty simple. Pace. In the first lineup where Mainoo is playing with Xerxes, Bruno Fernandes and Dalot on that side, there's a clear lack of pace, which is therefore going to mean that the balance of the system is off, with all three of Xerxes, Mainoo and Bruno Fernandes all being players who want to move towards the ball and receive it to feet, and whilst Dalot has shown he can provide the movement ahead of play, in behind the back line as he did very well against Liverpool, he doesn't have that burst of acceleration over short distances or the pace over longer distances to make up for the lack of pace of the other three on that side, with them also not being left-footed, also contributing to the imbalance on United's left flank. Mainoo is someone who you want dropping off and receiving the ball to feet, but if you have Xerxes ahead of him also dropping off, he's going to be drawing a centre-back into Mainoo's space and congesting that area, allowing the opposition to squeeze higher up the pitch, knowing that United don't have the pace on that side to exploit the space in behind. However, in this second lineup with Dorgu on his outside, Højlund ahead and even Garnacho on the right with Ahmad at right wing back, now Mainoo playing in this more advanced role makes a lot more sense in regards to the balance of the system, because Højlund now has the pace to, rather than drop off and congest Mainoo's area, instead spin in behind into the channel, dragging the opposition's centre-back backwards and maximising the space that Mainoo has, and Dorgu's greater pace than Dalot allows him to exploit the space that Mainoo's deeper movement has created by making those overlapping runs ahead. And this movement ahead of play from Dorgu and Højlund on that side doesn't just benefit the system as a whole, but also Mainoo individually, as rather than being drawn towards him and the ball, the opposition players in the back line and midfield line are now being actively drawn away from this area, giving Mainoo greater space to receive possession and either link play or spin and turn his man before then driving into the space. But is Mainoo better in this deeper role in the midfield double pivot, or in this more advanced role on the left of a front three? Well, I don't think there's a definitive answer at the moment. I will give my opinion that I'm leaning towards at the moment later on in the video, but first let me just go through the pros and cons of using Mainoo in this advanced role and how I would set up the side to get the best out of him. And I'm also going to come on to how I think Dorgu's arrival could enable him to play here, at least for the rest of the season, and this is how. So in the build-up phase, usually in the two interior forward positions, Amorim would want those players to drop deep, drag the opposition's fullback high, creating the space in behind them in the channel for them to then spin into, either opening up space centrally or to receive a through ball in. However, whilst Mainoo can of course spin the player on his back, because he doesn't have the acceleration of an Ahmad or a Garnacho, you probably want either Højlund as a centre forward, or Patrick Dorgu from left wing back to be the players to take advantage of this space, and this would require Amorim to adjust his patterns of play in the build-up phase. When the ball goes out to Lisandro Martinez on the left side of the box, rather than having Mainoo being the player to spin in behind and provide the movement ahead, his skill set is much better suited to moving towards the ball, dragging the fullback even higher up the pitch, but also opening up a passing lane for Martinez to split the midfield, find his feet, from where Mainoo has a technical ability in these congested areas to be able to quickly bounce the ball out to Dorgu, running off the opposition's right-sided midfielder, for him to then drive forward with the ball ahead of Mainoo and the fullback into the space in the channel, or alternatively Mainoo could bounce the ball back inside for Bruno Fernandes, who can then be the player to find Dorgu's movement ahead, once again taking advantage of Mainoo's deeper movement. Now in the middle third, Mainoo initially will take up a position in this left-sided half space, and in a front five containing Højlund, Garnacho, Ahmad and Dorgu, I do think that Mainoo would suit this role because he has plenty of pace and movement around him and ahead of him, which is going to lead to the opposition's back line dropping off to track the runs, opening up more space between the lines for Mainoo, or if they instead sit high, they're now opening up the space in behind for the runners to exploit. Now in the middle third, you could once again use a similar pattern of play to the build-up phase, with Martinez looking to split the midfield line and find Mainoo's feet, from where he can either bounce a ball inside to Bruno or outside to Dorgu, or even turn himself, and then looking to find the run of Højlund back across the ball, with Mainoo playing a reverse pass splitting the right back and right sided centre back, or Mainoo could look to the opposite side for Garnacho, who can make a bursting run from the right sided half space between the left sided centre back and left back. But another key benefit of having Mainoo in this more advanced role, as opposed to a more natural wide player like Garnacho for example, is that if Bruno Fernandes is used in the midfield double pivot behind, which I think is where Amorim would use him if he was using Mainoo further forward, then this opens up the opportunity for seamless positional interchange between Bruno and Mainoo. See here, once again Maguire shifts the ball to Martinez on the left, and in this example when Dorgu makes a run up the channel from that deeper starting position, the opposition's right-sided midfielder is going to diligently track the run, which makes it hard for Mainoo to find Dorgu with a bounce pass outside to him, but because the right-sided midfielder has been dragged deeper, this then opens up the space for Mainoo to drop into, which is firstly going to temporarily see United switch from that 3-2-5 or 3-4-3 possession shape, whatever you want to refer to it as, to more of a 3-3-4, with Mainoo the extra man in central midfield alongside Bruno and Agate. But secondly, this will also drag the opposition's fullback high, disrupting the opposition's defensive shape, wherefrom Mainoo can now get on the ball, and this is where coordinated movements can work to allow United to progress the ball in behind the opposition's midfield line. Højlund can use Mainoo's deeper movement as a trigger to spin from the centre back into the space that the right back has vacated, and Bruno Fernandes, because Mainoo has dropped deeper, can now look to run off of the back of the opposition midfielder who had initially pushed up onto him in order to man press him. And now if Mainoo can get the ball out of his feet and split the midfield line, finding Højlund's feet, and Højlund for a while remembers he's a footballer and not a WWE wrestler, then he can now be the player to bounce the ball either out to Dorgu running down the channel or back inside to Bruno Fernandes, who can now become the free man in between the lines, having moved off of the back of the central midfielder. And if Højlund gets the layoff right, now Bruno Fernandes can receive possession, goal side of the midfield, facing forward, now able to find Garnacho's movement in behind, whilst Mainoo has essentially switched positions with Bruno, allowing Amorim to maintain that 3-2 rest defence shape for the defensive security behind the front five. And so now you can clearly see how having pace around Mainoo can work to get the best out of him, with Dorgu on his outside, Højlund up front keeping the centre-backs pinned backwards, and Garnacho from the right-sided half space on the other side, able to use his pace at the end of the passing sequence to provide the killer movement ahead to get into a goal-scoring position. And so overall, I do think Kobbie Mainoo could play further forward as the left interior forward, or what I guess people refer to as the left attacking midfielder, with the arrival of Patrick Dorgu at left wing back facilitating this with his pace and running ahead of play, creating the necessary balance and opening up the right spaces in the system. Although saying this, I do think Xerxes ahead of Mainoo does cause a stylistic clash, as with Xerxes ideally you want both players either side of him to have the pace to be able to run off of his deeper movement, not just to take advantage of the space he creates, but also open up the space for him to receive the ball in as well, and so Højlund ahead of Mainoo is definitely a better stylistic fit for the system. Long term, however, I still think Mainoo's position is going to be deeper in central midfield, not as a sitting destructive central midfielder, but more as either a kind of roaming playmaker or box-to-box midfielder alongside Ugarte, which is where I think Mainoo works best because his best attributes are his press resistance and his shorter passing, and he has shown particularly for England in the game against Ireland at the start of the season that he's more than capable when it comes to providing ball progression via those clever incisive passes between the lines. And even though some people say that he isn't quick enough to play in the double pivot, I think the more advanced role requires more pace, and Mainoo does have the athleticism and the physicality alongside the defensive output to function in that double pivot. Also long term, given that Amorim is using a 3-4-3, I think ideally you want the two players at either side of the centre forward to be more like wide attackers or forwards compared with midfielders, not just to provide the pace ahead of play and when moving into the channels, but also just greater goal scoring output in the final third, which is why I have suggested players like Cunha and Kunku and Lookman in the past for those particular roles. Someone like Cherki doesn't have that sort of pace, but he's levels above Mainoo at the moment in terms of operating between the lines and being the side's creative playmaker. However, considering Amorim's lack of offensive options for the rest of the season, and that Bruno Fernandes seems to be thriving in that deeper role, with Dorgu now being brought in, I think Mainoo could cement a starting spot in that more advanced role. And so it does lend itself to that sort of positional interchange between Bruno and Mainoo that I did speak about earlier on in the video. So let me know where you think Mainoo's best role is short term and long term, and if you want to sign up to the Patreon and then get the ebook for free when it is released, I'll leave it linked on the end screen now.